In the summer of 1908, a house clearance agent named Hector Drummond was commissioned by the solicitors managing the estate of the late Sir Edmund Calder to catalogue and remove the contents of Calder Hall, a sandstone mansion in Northumberland that had stood vacant for 11 years following Sir Edmund's death in 1897. Drummond was 47 years old. He had spent 22 years clearing the estates of the English gentry, emptying houses, cataloguing furniture, arranging auction, disposing of what could not be sold. He had worked in rooms that had not been opened since the previous century. He was accustomed to the particular atmosphere of sealed domestic space, the smell of undisturbed decades, the way a room holds its last moment of occupation like an intake of breath never exhaled. What he found in the basement of Calder Hall was not that. He descended the basement stairs on his third day in the house. The basement ran the full footprint of the building, approximately 60 feet by 90 feet, which was standard for a Victorian country house of this scale. He catalogued the wine cellar, the coal store, and the larder without difficulty. Then, behind a shelving unit at the eastern end of the basement, he found a second door. It was not concealed. It was not locked. It opened onto a staircase that descended further, a second flight, stone-cut, with no iron railing, worn smooth on the treads in a manner consistent with long use. The second staircase descended 22 feet below the basement floor. At the bottom was a space that Drummond would spend the better part of the following week attempting to describe accurately in the estate catalogue he was being paid to produce. It was a room approximately 40 feet square, with a vaulted ceiling of dressed stone reaching to 12 feet at its apex. The walls were lined on three sides with a continuous installation of wooden cabinets, floor to ceiling, each cabinet sealed with a brass lock. The fourth wall was bare stone, with a single aperture approximately 2 feet square set into it at floor level, opening onto darkness. And on the floor, arranged in a grid of 24 units, each mounted on a timber base and connected to its neighbors by copper wire of a gauge Drummond had never seen used in domestic installation, were devices he could not name. Iron housings, approximately the size of a hatbox, each with a glass panel on the uppermost face through which a wound copper element was visible. All 24 connected, all 24 dust-free, in a room that had not been entered, as far as the estate solicitors knew, in 11 years. The estate solicitor's instructions to Drummond, which survive in the Calder family papers at the Northumberland Archives in Berwick-upon-Tweed, specified that all cataloguing was to be completed within 3 weeks, and that all items for disposal were to be removed to a licensed auctioneer in Newcastle. The instructions said nothing about a sub-basement because the solicitors did not know one existed. Drummond wrote to them from Calder Hall on his 4th day, describing what he had found and asking for guidance. Their written response, which is also in the family papers, instructs him to catalogue the sub-basement contents with the same care as the upper floors, to make no attempt to open the locked cabinets without authorization, and to await further instruction before removing anything from that level. Further instruction arrived 9 days later, not from the solicitors, but from a firm of London barristers named Ashford, Cray and Whitmore, acting on behalf of an unnamed principal, instructing Drummond to cease all cataloguing of the sub-basement, to provide a copy of any catalogue entries he had already produced relating to that level, and to ensure that access to the sub-basement was restricted to himself until their representative arrived. Their representative arrived the following afternoon. He spent 4 hours in the sub-basement. He removed, in 2 leather cases, an unspecified number of items. He did not sign an inventory. He did not provide a receipt. He left without identifying himself or his principal. Drummond's working catalog, the handwritten document he produced page by page as he moved through the house, contains 12 pages of sub-basement entries before breaking off mid-sentence. The break corresponds to the date the barrister's letter arrived. The 12 pages are in the Northumberland archives with the family papers. Pages 13 onward do not exist. Drummond was not an impressionable man. He had cleared houses where the basements held nothing more remarkable than coal dust and old wine and the detritus of 50 years of domestic storage. He did not, as a professional, invest ordinary work with significance it did not earn. He wrote to the solicitors because he was a man who operated within his remit and recognized when something exceeded it. And what he wrote in that fourth-day letter to the solicitors in Newcastle, in the careful, functional language of a man describing a professional situation to his clients, was that the devices on the floor of the sub-basement appeared, to his untrained eye, to be in working order, not dismantled, not disused, in the state of something that could, if connected to a supply of whatever it required, be operated. He had been in enough houses to know the difference between equipment that had been put away and equipment that had been left ready. Before we go further, if you find these buried investigations as fascinating as I do, hit subscribe so the next one finds you when it drops. The algorithm tends to suppress this kind of research, unless you tell it otherwise. To understand what Hector Drummond found beneath Calder Hall, we have to go back, not just to the Victorian country house as a cultural institution, and not just to the great English estates of the 19th century. We have to go back to a question that architectural and social historians of the period have never systematically investigated: why the great houses built or substantially modified between roughly 1840 and 1890 were, with a frequency that patterns rather than coincidence explains, provided with sub-basement levels that do not appear in the architectural plans filed with estate surveyors, do not appear in the property conveyances that passed the houses between owners, and were, in house after house, found to contain equipment and installations that bore no relationship to any domestic function the official record of those houses describes. The official history of the Victorian country house as a building type is substantially complete. We know the architects who designed them, the estate agents who sold them, the families who inhabited them, and the purposes of every principal room. What the official history does not account for is the sub-basement, because the official history is built from documents that were designed, in most cases, to reflect the public life of the house and not its private infrastructure. The basement of a Victorian country house was the working level: kitchens, servants' quarters, cellars. The sub-basement, where it existed, was below the working level, and what happened there was not recorded in the documents that domestic historians work from. It was recorded, if at all, in estate management correspondence, in private letters, and in the accounts of the tradespeople and laborers who were occasionally sent down there to work on things they were not asked to explain. An estate carpenter named William Tovey, employed at Harwood Park in Hertfordshire from 1871 to 1894, wrote in a letter to his brother dated February 1882 that he had spent 3 days in the lower basement of the main house, replacing a section of the conduit system that ran along the east wall. He described the conduit as metal tube of approximately 2 inches in diameter, fitted at intervals with glass housings through which a coiled element was visible. He described the coiled elements as similar to those he had seen in electrical demonstrations at a scientific exhibition in London. He said he had been instructed by the estate steward to replace the section that had corroded and to make no alteration to any fitting whose housing remained intact. He had done this work without being told what the system did. He assumed it was connected to the experimental lighting installations that some of the larger houses were beginning to adopt. He wrote that he was not certain of this, because the conduit did not connect to any light fitting he was aware of in the house. The letter is in a private family collection. A descendant posted a transcription of it to a genealogical research forum in 2016. It has not been cited in any published history of Harwood Park or of Victorian country house technology. There is a growing body of independent research suggesting that the great houses of the 1840-1890 period served functions that their public histories have never recorded, and that those functions were concentrated in sub-basement levels that were systematically excluded from architectural documentation and property records. What researchers in this field have identified is that these levels contained equipment consistent with the collection, storage, and distribution of electrical energy at a scale and sophistication that the official history of Victorian electrical technology does not acknowledge as existing before the 1880s, and in some documented cases before the 1860s. The conduit systems Tovey was repairing in 1882 were fitted with coiled glass elements whose configuration matches the induction coil designs Tesla would patent commercially a decade later, and that Faraday described theoretically in the 1830s, but that no Victorian country house electrician should, by the official record, have had the means to manufacture or install. Wiltshire, 1866, the estate accounts of Thornfield House, held in the Wiltshire and Swindon History Centre under an estate management series, contain a payment dated March 14, 1866, to a contractor identified only as Messrs. Linton and Webb for installation of apparatus, lower level, per specification Ref. 7. The payment is for £63, a substantial sum, equivalent to several months of a tradesman's wages. No specification reference 7 has been located in any surviving Thornfield House document. No invoice from Messrs. Linton and Webb describes what the apparatus was. The estate accounts are otherwise meticulous. This is the only payment in 40 years of records that references an installation without describing it. Yorkshire, 1879, a house physician named Dr. James Aldred, employed in the household of the Darnley family at Darnley Hall near Harrogate, wrote in his private diary in November 1879 that he had been invited by Lord Darnley to inspect an installation in the house's lower basement that Lord Darnley described as having been in place since his father's time. Aldred, who had a scientific education, described what he saw in his diary in careful detail: a series of glass-enclosed coil housings connected by copper wire to a central manifold, from which a single conductor ran through a sealed conduit up through the basement ceiling and, as far as he could trace it, toward the east wing of the house. He estimated the installation contained at least 40 individual coil units. He wrote that Lord Darnley told him the installation had been maintained in working order by a succession of stewards who had each been instructed in its operation by their predecessor, with no written documentation of that instruction ever having been produced. When Aldred asked what it did, Lord Darnley said that it made the house comfortable in ways he found difficult to describe more precisely. Aldred's diary is held in the Borthwick Institute for Archives at the University of York. The November 1879 entries are on pages 114 through 117 of Volume 4. They have been consulted twice in the Institute's records and have not been cited in any published biography of the Darnley family or any history of Darnley Hall. This is not coincidence. This is a pattern. But here is what makes Hector Drummond's account different from every other account of sub-basement installations in the great Victorian houses. In 1947, 39 years after Drummond catalogued the 12 pages and stopped, Calder Hall was sold by the Calder family's remaining heir to a property developer who planned to convert it into a residential hotel. The conversion required a structural survey. The survey was conducted by a Newcastle-based architect named Clement Rudd, who was required to inspect and document every level of the building as part of his commission. Rudd descended to the sub-basement. He prepared a measured floor plan of the space and a written condition assessment. Both are held in the Tyne and Ware archives under the Rudd Architectural Practice Papers, donated by his firm in 1981. Rudd's floor plan shows the 40-foot square vaulted room. It shows the cabinet installation on 3 walls. It shows the aperture in the 4th wall. What it does not show is the grid of 24 mounted devices that Drummond had described in his 12 pages of catalog entries 39 years earlier. The floor is clear in Rudd's plan. The timber bases are gone. The copper wiring is gone. The iron-housed, glass-paneled units are gone. Whatever Ashford Cray and Whitmore's unnamed representative had removed in his 2 leather cases in 1908 had not been the entire installation. But by 1947, the installation was. The cabinets on the walls remained. The room remained. The aperture remained. But the floor grid was gone, and Rudd's condition assessment makes no mention of any evidence that it had ever been there. No bolt holes in the timber floor, no wire conduit stubs, no mounting hardware. As if the removal had been performed by people who understood exactly what they were taking and exactly what they needed to leave behind no trace of. The Northumberland Archives holds several specific documents about Calder Hall that have never been resolved against each other. They have never explained what was meant by Specification Ref. 7 in the Thornfield House accounts, not Calder Hall specifically, but the same unresolved pattern appears in the Calder family papers in the form of an estate management entry from 1873 referencing a renewal of sub-level apparatus per standing instruction with no specification number and no contractor name. They have never explained why Ashford, Cray and Whitmore, acting for an unnamed principal, had the legal authority to instruct a contracted estate cataloger to cease work on a private estate without identifying their client or providing receipts for removed items. They have never explained how, between 1908 and 1947, the 24 floor-mounted devices documented in 12 pages of Drummond's catalog were removed from a sealed sub-basement without leaving any physical evidence of their mounting or their removal. Why does Lord Darnley describe an installation maintained through a succession of stewards with no written documentation? A chain of oral instruction deliberately kept outside the written record? Why does Rudd's 1947 floor plan show a clean floor in a room Drummond documented as containing a grid of mounted, wired equipment 39 years earlier? Why did a London barrister's firm, acting for an unnamed principal, arrive at a Northumberland estate within 1 day of receiving a catalogue description of what was there, remove items in unlisted cases, and leave without a receipt? Why does a principal who needs to remain unnamed move that quickly? The honest answer is that we do not know for certain. What we have are 12 pages of an estate catalogue in the Northumberland Archives, a carpenter's letter on a genealogical forum, a physician's diary in York, an estate account entry for £63 with no specification, and a 1947 architectural floor plan showing a clean floor where a grid of equipment had been 40 years before, and a pattern of institutional and private response in Northumberland, in Hertfordshire, in Wiltshire, in Yorkshire, that, in every case, treated sub-basement equipment in the great Victorian houses as something to be maintained in silence, removed without receipt, and left without trace. For the 31 years between his Calder Hall commission in 1908 and his death in 1939, Hector Drummond continued to work as an estate clearance agent in the north of England. He completed the cataloguing of Calder Hall's upper floors. He arranged the Newcastle auction. He received his fee. He never submitted his account to any newspaper or any professional society. He never wrote to the solicitors again about the barrister's representative or the removed items. He was a professional, and the matter was, as far as his professional remit extended, resolved. What he could not resolve, and what his daughter said he returned to in conversation several times in his final years, was the question of the dust. The sub-basement at Calder Hall had been sealed for 11 years. Every other sealed room in the house had accumulated 11 years of dust on every surface. The devices on the floor of the sub-basement had been dust-free. Not wiped clean recently, there was no evidence of recent cleaning. Simply dust-free, in a room sealed for 11 years, as if something about the devices, or about what they did, or about what they had last been doing, had kept the dust from settling on them. He did not know what that meant. He knew it was not an accident. He wrote 12 pages about a room that a London barrister told him to stop writing about. And in all 12 of those pages, which you can read today in the Northumberland archives if you ask for the Calder family papers and turn to the estate clearance documents, he never once described the devices as old. The sub-basement at Calder Hall still exists. The building was converted to residential flats in the 1960s and has been occupied continuously since. The sub-basement is listed in the building's current floor plans, held by the local planning authority as a storage and utility level. The cabinets that Drummond catalogued on 3 walls and that Rudd documented in 1947 as still in place are presumably still there. The aperture in the 4th wall, the 2-foot square opening at floor level that Drummond noted in his catalogue and that led to darkness beyond the reach of his lantern, is in neither the planning authority's current floor plan nor Rudd's 1947 survey marked as sealed or blocked. It is simply not shown. Whether it leads somewhere or where it leads, or what the vaulted stone room was built to connect to through that opening, is not recorded in any document that is publicly accessible. The official history tells us that the great Victorian country houses were exactly what their owners presented them as, expressions of wealth, status, and domestic ambition, equipped with the technologies of their age as those technologies became available. What the carpenter's letter and the physician's diary and the 12 pages of an interrupted catalogue tell us is that some of those houses were equipped with something that predated the technologies of their age, that was maintained across generations through oral instruction with no written record, and that was, when threatened, with documentation, removed with a speed and thoroughness that required preparation, authority, and a principle unwilling to be named. Whatever was in those basements, it mattered enough to someone that they had a system for taking it away before anyone could finish describing it. These records survive because people refuse to stop looking. Subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear it. History does not disappear when it is locked in a cabinet. It disappears when no one is left who remembers the combination. Next week, I am following a thread that connects the Calder Hall sub-basement to a probate inventory filed with the Prerogative Court of Canterbury in 1897, the year Sir Edmund Calder died. Probate inventories of this period listed all significant personal property at time of death. The Calder Inventory, which is in the National Archives at Kew under the Probate Record Series, lists the contents of every room in the house. It does not list the sub-basement, not as empty, not as inaccessible. It does not list it at all, which means the solicitors in 1908 were not the first people to pretend that level of the house did not exist. Sir Edmund's own estate had done it first, 11 years earlier, the week he died.